Welcome to the Blackbar podcast. My name's Nick. I'm joined by my two co-hosts, Caleb Weidman and Zach Snyder.
I'm Caleb.
Hey guys, how's it going?
It's good to see you.
I did a great job with those superhero movies. I don't know enough about Zack Snyder to make this go properly. How you guys doing?
Oh my gosh, dude, I'm still warm as ever. I don't know. I know we said this bit the other week, but I'm just so hot. We gotta bring back the fall. Where did it go? Someone just bring it back, please.
It's only July. It's gonna get worse before it gets better.
Right now, stop it. My glasses are fogging right now because I'm getting frustrated at you saying those words.
It is a totally reasonable temperature. It's like 72 degrees, I think. I'm in a jacket. I'm enjoying the day. It's a great day.
Maybe just have to move to Michigan, Zach.
Oh,
it's 75 out here in Grand Rapids. So
outside of the unbearable heat that I can't stand, Nick. What all going on today? What's on our show this fine evening?
Yes, actually, we have a guest tonight. We have Tessa Voccola here with us. So you can say hi to Tessa there in the chat. She's going to be joining us today. She's a brand and content manager over at RVRB. Hey, Tessa, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing great. It is 95 here. Just keep it going.
I think you might win the heat index there.
Yeah.
Oh man,
it's 95 where you are, Zach.
I think as soon as you brought her on screen, I started sweating more because of how hot it is down there. I could feel it. Empathetic heat waves over here.
It's you can see it through the exposure of the camera.
It's very bright here.
Well, Tessa, for those that, this is your first time on the podcast. We connected with you a while back at that church conference. You and your team doing awesome stuff over there. I'm curious. I know we have a handful of questions, but what got you started in the world of media? Helping give people a little background beyond you being a content manager.
So my mom was an original blogger.
Okay.
An OG.
Cool.
And so whenever I was 11 or 12, I started a blog. I stole her camera and I've never stopped. I actually stole two of her cameras. And so I've been making stuff for the internet basically since I was 11 or 12.
Wow.
And I somehow managed to find a job in it.
Yeah. Awesome. Isn't that the case for all of us? I can't believe we found a job in this.
It just happened.
Do you still have record of your original? So was it vlogs or was it written blogs?
No, blog. Yeah, no. I was back in Blogspot day. It's still out there if you really search for it. It's still there because I don't delete anything.
Caleb, we're going to go ahead and cut to the first original video that Tessa put out online. Go ahead and...
Only if we all share our first videos, which I'm going to imagine that's going to be a veto from a...
Nope.
I never had a Blogspot. I did have a GeoCities account back when that was still a thing, but I have no idea what that is.
It was I remember this.
Very similar thing, but they blew up the site and literally all of the blogs that were on it went with it. So there is no.
I think I recall that there was a blog that you had created, Caleb, a while back, and I somehow found it. I remember sending it to you, and then immediately after sending it to you, suddenly it disappeared.
It's just that I remember. It's amazing.
He said, "I don't know what happened."
Right. It was working a minute ago. I just refreshed the page. I don't know.
It's gone.
So you were blogging. You got a camera, and then at some point you connected with RVRB. And I think the cool thing about RVRB that we've really enjoyed is they're very event centric, right? Mm-hmm. Capturing and containing events, supporting clients that need event coverage, and also posting on social media, right? Is there more that RVRB does as an agency, or is that kind of the core of their heart?
We do a lot of stuff, but what we are best known for is coming into your event and making content that your person gets off stage and we already have stuff posted. That's kind of how people know us. And then once they're in the door, then we're like, okay, we can help you on your pre-production, before your event, after your event, that kind of stuff. But that's the usually the first introduction is event stuff.
I think it was...
even...
go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was going to say, I even remember back at that church conference, just kind of seeing a little bit of what you guys were doing there. Like, you guys were very quick with the turnaround stuff, and I remember being very impressed with that. Even, what was that, 2021 when we were,
That was a minute ago.
It was a minute ago now. Yeah.
And I think it's cool that the application, especially for our audience being a bunch of like church media nerds, this is kind of something maybe in not quite as a produced level that a lot of people are feeling that they've got to pull off on an every Sunday basis to some extent, making sure that their Sunday morning service have proper coverage, not to mention all special events and stuff. So I'm hoping you're going to have plenty of super secret industry secrets to share so that we can all knock out stuff just as fast as you are.
Maybe not all the secrets. Clark might be upset if you just gave us all of it, but
we don't want to be in bad water with Clark.
Nah, man, I'll give you whatever. Then you all go and figure it out, and if you need help, you'll come find us.
There you go.
Hey, very nice. Caleb, earlier this year, he was doing a similar role at Passion Conference. So I think he probably got a little taste of like the intensity of quick turnaround production. Caleb can speak more to that.
I was in charge of sermon clips, grab 60 seconds, caption it, and send it off. And my quota was about 12 clips a service within about 45 minutes of the service being done. And it was blistering the pace to be able to move it.
Honestly, no one does it like Passion these days, honestly.
They had some very cool tools to be able to make that even reasonable for someone to be able to pull off. But it's a unique space of content creation and content delivery when you're not just limited by the tools of it, but just specifically the time that you have to make it happen. It's really when the rubber meets the road in a lot of cases, and you've got a lot of special experience in that. And I'm excited to hear what your experience has proven and what we can learn from you, for sure.
Yeah, and I think the reality of church settings versus like more of, we've talked about conferences already so far. I know Reverb does things outside of the church, also things inside the church. I know you guys have done Global Leadership Summit, among others. And I think that one of the biggest things, regardless of your scale, like if someone's watching this and like, man, I can barely turn around a recap in a week, much less 45 minutes. I think one of the biggest central themes that we've learned ourselves, and I'm curious to hear from you, is going to be turnaround time. Like turning around content quickly in an age in which content is very quickly consumed and eliminated is interesting. So do you have any personal tips for how to turn around content quickly, regardless of the scale of the production that you're a part of?
I think one thing is you have to know that it's a learned skill. It's not something that you hop in and you just know how to do. It is a learned skill. And another part of it is like you have to be able to prioritize. So you can capture everything or you can get it done fast. You cannot do both unless you have a massive team like Passion who can be rotating people in and out. And so whenever you're in a smaller scale, you have to say, what does winning look like for me today? And how does that coincide with speed? If winning for you is speaker quotes, how do I put all of my focus on that so that that's the thing that gets done faster and then everything else can be done a little bit later? You have to know what is priority. You can't just send people in and be like, oh, just do, because everybody's going to have a different idea of what winning looks like. So as a leader, you have to be able to set that to set your team up for success.
Wow. I know one of the things, Nick and I have done a lot of event coverage at the church that we worked at together at the time. And there was not an event that would go by that we wouldn't have like a shot sheet prepared ahead of time of like, we could go in there and just shotgun things all day long and just capture whatever. But if we know, like, we think of it almost like a wedding. Like, what are the things that we absolutely must capture? Like the establishing shot. We must capture these people on stage, this moment in the event, whatever. And then we could be there for half of the length of the event because we already got all the important stuff and have the video ready to go by the end of it. Little tricks like that are definitely very handy for getting prioritizing exactly what you were saying.
That's also a big thing if you're like a creator leading other people, is it might be really natural to you to do it and to see it, and you might not need that list, but just because you know what needs to be done doesn't mean that the rest of your team does. So remembering that like, oh yeah, I've done this 8 million times, but maybe they haven't. So this list might actually be really helpful for them.
Yeah. For your team, how big do your teams tend to be that go out and cover events?
We kind of range from about a 4-person team to we've had up to 22 people. We did 22 people at Orange Conference in 2019. I think that might have been our biggest team that we've done.
Wow.
But a lot of our events are like 4 or 5 people.
Do you feel like, someone was just saying a minute ago, sometimes it's easy for you to know exactly what's capturing. Does it feel like it's harder with more people, or does it just scale in a different way?
It all depends on how you lead, honestly. Whenever you have that many people, you kind of have a lot of smaller teams. And I think the hard thing is when you have one person in charge of all of that, then maybe all of their brain power is going towards making sure that video knows the story that they're telling, but then your photographers are kind of tossed by the wayside, and then they're missing things because you're not managing them. So whenever you have a much bigger team, you kind of have to think about how can I split up management so that everybody has the support that they need, while making sure that you, as if you're the top level person, are focusing on the most important messaging parts.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that you can't really hand off to somebody else.
Right. I'm curious from like a really practical, technical level, how you handle the actual data content moving in and out. Do you have a NAS that you're all writing to, or is everybody sort of handling their own SD cards and hard drives and all that?
So a video person would have a much more in-depth answer than I do.
Fair enough.
Our video guys, I know they do a tethered situation where we'll have somebody pulling clips and someone editing in the same project all at the same time. I don't have the slightest idea how they do it, but it is something that they do. For photo, everybody just has a hard drive and they're putting it up on SmugMug as they go. Most of our stuff for photo, we have one person who's shooting and editing. We have a couple events a year where it's we have a designated editor. And those ones, it's just one person owns everything.
Wow.
Can you explain what SmugMug is for people who may not know?
Yes. SmugMug is a gallery service. It's one I've used for forever. It has some quirks, but I am a big fan. I find it to be pretty easy, and it's just... Also, it's one of the few ones that still allows you to have unlimited. You don't have to pay for, unless they change that and I'm grandfathered in somewhere.
Sure.
SmugMug, if you're listening, don't do that. And if you want to sponsor us, let us know.
Because you're the only one left. Everyone else is you got 1 terabyte. And I'm okay, in a week, we'll be done.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. I recall seeing a TikTok, actually, where someone is the photographer for some sort of hockey team, I think it is, and it's a 1-person show, and all they have is their photo camera, and they literally hook it up to their iPhone.
Yeah.
And they have all the different kind of presets that they need on, and I just know watching it it turns over so quickly for them, because they would just immediately change it over, which was pretty incredible in watching. But for yourself, as someone who does a lot of this content and does a lot of this work with different clients, I wanted to know if you have kind of an idea of what content seems to do the best on social media. Are we and it could be any social media? We could talk about all the social media.
Yeah.
Does there seem to be a specific type of content that seems to do best from these types of events?
I just made Clark film a video about this, actually.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. No, one of the things we found is the idea of access. When you give your audience access to people, experiences that they wouldn't necessarily see outside of what's already on stage, they expect what's going to be on stage, whether that's talking to a speaker backstage, or how Passion Creative does a ton of stuff leading up to their conference telling how they do things. People love an inside look. In NASCAR, a lot of times we'll put a camera on the hat of a driver while they're signing stuff with people, and those little inside intimate moments, just any way that you can kind of give people a peek into a door that while sitting in the audience they wouldn't necessarily get. People really, really love that. And then the other thing is, we had someone tell us once that nothing is ever too long or too short. It's only too boring. And so I think especially with how social is now, where it's like quick cuts. You gotta get them fast and keep them there. You have to remember that you can have a longer story play out as long as you're interesting. If you are not interesting, it doesn't matter if it is 5 seconds long, no one's going to care. And so learning how to tell a good story is by far way more important than learning how to make it as beautiful as possible.
Yeah, wow. Clark was actually at Assault this past year, and I think that was a large part of what he talked about there. I loved what he had to say. And I think, like, you know, the idea of making sure that you're telling story first over, you know, considering duration, I think is even helps with the idea of like making better content, right? Yeah. So like we could all try to fit everything into 60 seconds because that's what fits on every platform, right? But I feel like sometimes there can be some sacrifices that are made for that timeline that are necessary for a longer form story. Yeah. You also mentioned the first point you made there. Could you go a little bit more into that? Is there a little bit more that you can talk about specifically? Anything with that at all? Or
I'm gonna need you to remember what my first point was.
Was it about storytelling, Nick? Is that what
you're gonna have to give me a reminder. I said a lot of things.
Maybe a good question is like, what is the way that you determine with your clients what a good story is beforehand, or is it on the spot, or do you find like the person that you know is going to be most interesting on camera? Like what helps you determine what the best story is going to be with so much going on at a production?
I think part of it is preparation beforehand to make sure that you know the client. You have to know, once again, kind of going back to that idea of what is winning. Like, is winning for them selling tickets? Is winning for them just making sure that the people that are there are really excited? Like, you go with WinShape and their purpose isn't anything to go out on social. It's all internal. So it's knowing, one, who is the audience that you're actually trying to bring in with this story, because that is the basis of what you're going to do. And then the other thing, a lot of it is off the cuff because we work really well that way. I've been trying to really force our team to plan ahead this year. I kind of live under the idea that I want all of my creative energy to be going towards the creative act, not towards solving unnecessary problems. So I'm a big proponent of having a plan that can then be tossed if something better happens. So I think I've lost the thread of your question, but I'm going to tell you something else instead.
Go ahead.
I think you need to be able to come in and be like, I know where we're running, but I also know if something more interesting happens, we're going to pivot and we're going to go.
Yeah. Funny enough, your answer to that question is basically the same thing you just did of I lost the thread of the question, but my answer is more interesting to that. So we're going to get into that as well.
Got a lot of thoughts up here.
No, for sure. Pudding, right? Yeah. I think that makes it a ton of sense of figuring out, I mean, certainly pre-production, anything that you can do to the plan. I have to imagine that sometimes it's a struggle to an extent, especially it's live events. Things happen, right? And when you're working with such a large team, I imagine that kind of preparation can be hard. When you are able to pull it off, what does pre-production planning, what can that do for you when you do it well?
Well, one, it frees you up to actually be your max level creative because you're not wondering, when am I getting lunch, or what is the name of this client? Like dumb stuff. That's just like, okay, where's the schedule? That kind of stuff makes it so that you look, you're done, you're out, all the info is in one place. And that is why project managers are the loves of my life, because they take care of it. The other thing is, if you want to continue to be innovative and ahead of the trends or whatnot, you have to be thinking ahead and coming up with some ideas. So I, a lot of times, am put in the position of being like a solo content creator, where I go out and I shoot the more like social specific pieces with like the DJI Pocket and whatnot. And so for me, part of my prep is that I go through my saved folders and I have a whole list of ideas that I might not use all of them,
Sure.
But they're all there so that whenever I show up, I'm like, okay, here are 12 ideas I can run with. And then if something better comes along, awesome. But then not only have I spent time thinking about, will any of these ideas actually work for this client? I also have backups in case I get overwhelmed or we're like, hey, we need a quick win because the boys are taking a little bit longer to get this edit out for a good reason. We need you to do a quick win. I have all of those pieces, and it also helps so that like Clark or Casey, who they're kind of like run the event, and I'm like I'm a creator under them. It helps so that they can put their focus in the places that need them most versus on me when I've already gotten this approved. I can run.
Great.
That kind of stuff.
I love, you mentioned it a couple times in the previous question and in this one as well about talking about wins, and it's not necessarily wins for Reverb or wins for you, but it's wins for the client. Yeah. We've talked about this dozens of times with the Blackbar podcast. Even as a designer, I can make you the prettiest logo that you love ever so much and you want to put it on your t-shirt and tattoo it on your face and all that kind of stuff. But if it brings you no more business as a company, then what are we even doing here, right? That's not a win for you as a company, as an organization. And it's the same thing here with your social media. Everybody's social media account, every church's social media account has goals, it has wins. There are priorities. You're not doing it just for the fun of it or doing it just because churches should be doing it. You're doing it hopefully to be reaching people, reaching either your existing congregation or your community or anything like that. I'm curious, I have to imagine that you see a lot of church social media accounts and you see a lot of content posted on church social media accounts. When it comes to planning for, like, let's say a totally typical Sunday morning service, what if you were trying to capture the kind of content that you would at a totally typical Sunday morning service? What are the kind of things that you would be prepared for or looking for if you were to do imaginary pre-production for this imaginary church service?
Depends on what role I'm filling that day.
Sure.
I think figuring out how to capture the people that are there, not the people that are on stage. I think especially if you're a new creative coming into, like, I'm volunteering at this church, it's super fun, I want to make all this, it's so easy to just pay attention to the screen or who's on stage and like the things that are well lit, but really paying attention to what's going on in the lobby, what's going on during the gathering, where how are people reacting, and not in a way that's invasive. It kind of depends on the vibe of your church. There's some where it's like they're perfectly fine with you being in their face, and then there's some that they're just not. I think part of it is really learning, one, how to look away from what's obvious, and two, treating it very much like you're documenting versus I'm out to make something that's beautiful and sexy. I do a lot of work with Jesus Image out of Florida, and they're really, really good at the idea of coming into their space as we're documenting the move of God. And it's a very interesting, because that's a very Pentecostal area. So it's different than what you're going to get at like an Orange conference. Right. But I try to take the mentality I learned there, which is like, how can I document this well and respectfully, but the whole experience, and take that into other areas as well.
Yeah. Well,
I know the question specifically of how I can't even imagine how many times we've been asked the questions of how to be able to capture something on a Sunday morning without looking like a total jerk. You know,
you have thoughts.
right. I think everybody's seen or heard the horror stories of that photographer getting like right up in the altar, or even I remember. Well, I wasn't there for the day of, and Nick, you weren't there either. It happened before our time at the church that we were serving, but apparently the production team got a hold of one of those big. It was
a Steadicam vest.
Steadicam things with a giant camera. The very first Sunday they had it, the production guy who was using it was so excited, he ran up on center stage in front of the podium during worship, like in front of the main singer, like blocking literally everybody's view. And it got used for exactly one Sunday, and they put it in a box and never used it again.
I think they're still trying to sell that piece of equipment, if I remember. Man. Even after, after our 7 years of working there. It's still in a closet somewhere.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to that kind of environment, there are a couple things you need to think about. And one is the fact that, yes, you have a job to do, but you are not the most important person there. The most important person there are the people in the audience. And so you need to be respectful of their experience. And so even if you have to do something where you're up in front and you're in like a distracting area, you get in, you get what you need, and you get out. So even if you are going to be a distraction, you minimize it by quickly getting it and not lingering. And that's something I've kind of learned over time, but also just this sense of like, okay, this is an honor that I've been given. It can be taken away. So I need to be respectful, not in a way that I'm so timid that I never get anything that I need, but knowing that like, I don't ever want to be in this speaker's space for longer than I have to, because I want them to feel really comfortable. And over time, if you do this for a long time, you start to learn certain speakers, they don't want you to move at all. And so you need to get in and get out. Some speakers, they don't care. So it's kind of feeling out each situation, because each situation is going to have a different bar for what is going to be distracting. And just kind of feeling it out, being willing to take risks, but not sitting in that risk too long. That's really it. You get your shot, you get out.
And you got to wear black, because if you're not wearing black, are you on the production team?
That's true. That's true.
Caleb and I, as he said, we did a lot of event coverage back at Grand Rapids First. And I recall we used to do this thing where both of us would have a camera and we'd pretend like we're having a conversation. And Caleb would usually face towards me, and I would take the longest lens we have and just kind of put it on his shoulder and try to get these candid shots. Because like we would have people like we'd walk up to them. Yeah. We try to be like really sneaky. And Caleb even made a video at one point talking about how to take photos during a worship service and making sure you have the mindset of actually being present in the moment and worshiping while you work.
Yes.
But I'm curious, like, if we can go down that rabbit hole of like gear wise and stuff, right? Do you guys prioritize longer lenses over, say, like a wider lens? Because I know for me the trade-off is I can be far away and people aren't distracted by my camera all that much, but I lose a certain look if all my lenses are like above, like, say 70 millimeter or something like that.
Yeah. We don't prioritize one or the other. It depends on what's happening at the time and how comfortable you are in the situation. Like, I have no qualms going right up to the front down the aisle. As soon as I get there, I get low. And I just make sure that I'm not like in big picture eyesight. I'm not in the cameraman's way. I think you can do stuff with either. And I do think kind of what you said, being involved in what is happening is such a big thing, especially in worship environments, when people are a lot less side-eye about the fact that you're taking photos of those kind of moments. When in between that, they see that you are actually a part of the experience. You're not just like, I'm here, I guess, So that is a part of it, is you're involved in what's happening. You're not outside of it.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing how simple just singing along with the song that's being played just removes
100%.
all sort of the tension in that moment. And people are like, oh yeah, you're just here. Also, you're one of us.
You're
you
a
just also have
homie.
a job to do.
Yeah.
You're a homie.
I think the way you said it was, if you look like you don't belong, people are gonna think you don't belong.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, you gotta be
I was
comfortable.
gonna say, I think on your was your Instagram or Reverbs, I saw Tessa Core. That was a good example of always just kind of dancing with a camera in your hand. Is that what?
That was me. I had to keep myself awake. 90% of those clips came from like a 10-day sprint, and I was losing it.
I do think there's something really important to be said about like it feels like to a certain extent getting good content at an event like that, like only maybe 30% of it is actually pressing the shutter button and make sure it's well exposed and all that kind of stuff. A lot of it is how you are vibing in the room and how and you get up to people and not freak them out or whatever. The answer for me is no, I'm not good at any of that. I hate doing it. I hate being near people at all.
That's why Caleb was the person that was like the person I was hiding behind trying to grab the photos.
He was the tripod.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm okay being the tripod. That's fine. Being like personable and friendly and looking like you belong in it, it goes a long way into making people feel comfortable.
Yeah,
it goes so far, especially outside of the other space when you're in like the lobby or any conference, like people mingling, being able to vibe with people, that is huge. They'll do anything you ask as long as you're a good time. And I'm an introvert, so I have to like turn it on max. And then as soon as I turn around, it's like all expression drops from my face. But I can turn it on.
I'm curious. We've talked a lot about pre-production and event coverage and that kind of stuff. We talked about specifically how to kind of apply it in a smaller context. Take us a little bit into like behind the scenes for like you're heading into an event. You talked about sometimes you'll generate a list of ideas beforehand. You'll talk about what is a win for an organization. Like, what are some of those, like the practical associated questions that go alongside of those things that really helps you flesh out pre-production even more? Because I feel like a lot of people hear pre-production and they're just like, I just got a plan and I don't know what I'm supposed to plan. Like I figured out what a win is. I figured out like I need to get the speaker and the music and people in the lobby. Like what else do you do to go above and beyond that in pre-production?
So I'm gonna think conference level versus like church. When I'm going into it and it's say I'm on social video, questions I'm kind of thinking of are there any sponsors that we have to make content about? Okay, I need their logos. I need to have their names. Okay, do you have merch that you want shown? Awesome. When I arrive, can that already be sitting there so that I don't have to go and just take stuff from the store and then explain that I am a credentialed person who's allowed to have it? These kind of things of like, okay, we know that these are pieces that they want. How can I show up having already asked the question so that everything I need is there? Or if they have certain speakers that were like, oh, we saw that John Acuff just came out with a book that's about this. Can we talk to him about that so that they can already start the ball rolling on getting that person's approval from their team for them to do something with us? So a lot of pre-production is just thinking like, okay, what are things that we already know we might need? How can we start asking the questions so that we have that when we get there? Because it has to go through like 14 other people before there's approval because everybody's very protective of their corner. And it's like, even though you might have established trust with layer 1 through 5, there's still 4 more layers of trust that you have to get. So asking ahead of time is really helpful. Or like if you're in video, being like, okay, we need a live stream in the room. Okay, who's in charge of that? This is what we need for that. Who's their tech person? Give me their contact so that we can make sure that it's set up. Just things that then you don't have to be panicking when you arrive because you've already asked these questions. And then if you can't make it happen, it's not because you weren't prepared. It's because the client didn't give you the go-ahead.
So it sounds like a common thread is a lot of communication. You're talking with the client, you're talking with your team, you're generating ideas internally, you're getting approval for those ideas. And then I'm sure, especially once it gets into the approval phase, trying to turn around content really fast, is there anything that you've seen that helps get that fast approval turnaround? Or, I mean, we've all worked with clients. We know how clients can be. And we know sometimes clients can be picky and sometimes clients can just totally ghost you. Like, do you have any other tips once you move from pre-production to production to that post-production and getting those content turnarounds?
I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to trust. If you're trying to do stuff real time, the client has to trust you. And part of that is your conversations that you have beforehand. Part of that is making sure that they understand how we work and what we need from them. And if we don't get this, then we can't do that. And we've been really lucky that a lot of our clients really trust us. And a lot of them right out the gate, they're like, absolutely, go for it. And then we have some where it's like, okay, we have to go back and forth a lot more. So it's like our timeline is extended, but it's still faster than everybody else, even with all of that back and forth. And then you have some events where it's like, it's been months and they still haven't posted it because they just never got around to approving it. So there comes a point where you can't do any more.
Yeah.
You have to do what's best for the client, even if you have to do what the client wants you to do, even if that might not be what you think is going to be the most useful.
Sure. We're very familiar with that concept.
Yeah, that's just part of working with people.
Yeah.
But
and you can even insert client for ministry within your church that you're working for.
Ministry, your pastor is going to have a different idea than you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to really work to sell that you know what you're talking about.
Yep.
I'm curious because it's. I mean, we've had these conversations with clients before, and it sounds like you've had plenty of conversations with these clients before. When you're working with a client that is interested in a product that will not serve their best interest one way or the other. Obviously, yes, trust is absolutely how you fix that problem. Do you have any tricks for helping communicate like the kind of value that the content that you would suggest would bring, as opposed to like helping them understand why it is what they're asking for isn't actually beneficial compared to what you suggest?
Yeah.
So I'm going to take an example from one of our events. I did a video that I was like, this is going to work really, really well. It was like a design captioned piece that I was like, it looks different than the other stuff we've been doing, but I know it's going to work. I know it's shareable. And I did not go with my gut and I just sent it to the person in charge. And she was like, I don't think this is going to work. No. And then instead, after that, I went to her and I explained and I said, this is why, like, we're going to do whatever it is you want, but I want you to know why I did this. This is why I think it's going to work. I think it's shareable because of this. And I think it matches your branding because of this. And after she was like, oh no, that makes perfect sense. Let's go. So I think some of it is when you make something that you're like, they might not understand why this is going to work. Instead of just assuming they'll figure it out and leaving them to their own devices, handing it to them and being like, hey, I want to show you this, have them watch it and they'll be like, this is why I did it. Right. Do you want to change anything? And then if they still are like, nah, this isn't going to work, that's fine. Because then they've made an informed decision. Obviously, don't go in with like a very like mansplainer attitude of like, no, this is the way it should be. But just that is helpful to them because they aren't that kind of creator. A lot of times the person who's running the accounts, they don't do the same thing I do. So it makes sense that they wouldn't understand why I would have done something like this if it's a little bit left field of what they've been doing.
Sure. And I feel like you've talked a lot about developing and building client trust. And I feel like doing stuff like that is just more currency added to the client relationship. Hey, here's like, we're already partnered together. We're already working together for this event. Here's an idea that I think is going to help advance your bottom line, your win. Like, I feel like that's just one more step on the equation of here's how you get connection and relationship with the clients that you're working with.
Yeah, it's a reminder that this is a collaboration and a partnership. We aren't coming in and taking over. This is a relationship and a give and take. A lot of how Reverb kind of says it's like, we aren't here to replace your team. We're here to supplement your team in a time when it's high stress. We are here to become a part of your team and be helpful as much as we can. So it's when they're involved in that process, that makes it so that when we're under the gun on something and they can't check it, and there are circumstances where they can be like, no, I trust you, go. Whereas if we weren't having those conversations and they weren't seeing that you were actually intentional about what you were doing, you're not doing it just because it's cool. You have a reason why you're doing it. Then when it's crunch time, they're going to trust you with those game time decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's huge.
I feel like a lot of it goes back to what is the win? Like we all need to be in alignment on what our actual goals here. We might have different tricks and techniques to accomplish that goal, but if we're all aiming for the same goal, I feel like there's a whole lot more leeway that can come in the specifics of how we're accomplishing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have been with Reverb. You guys have been putting on awesome content capture and recaps and working with clients and being in a diversity of spaces. You even said that you've been in many streaks where it's been like multiple days, sequential days where you've been going and going and going. Even prepping for our podcast today, like I know that we're between big production windows for you guys where it's just a lot of, especially for an introvert, a lot of energy that's being expelled. And one of the reasons I know about what you guys are doing is because you're very active on your own personal Instagram, on your own. You're creating your own content outside of your job, which is creating content, which is awesome. And it's cool because
chronically online.
It sounds like you're deeply bought into this field, which is awesome. But I am curious because I know how crazy and intense things can be. On your own personal page, you have content about books and outfits and different things in your own personal life that deviate away from Reverb content. How, as an introvert especially, do you balance like all of that so that you don't get burnt out? Because I think burnout's a big risk for us, but someone like yourself is turning out a lot of stuff consistently.
Burnout's huge.
Yeah.
I think part of it is like I naturally create that. The stuff I do for myself, that is genuinely fun for me. In a lot of ways, that is restful for me in a lot of seasons. Not all the time, but I am the kind of person where it's like, I don't have a deadline and I'm still going to make something. Yeah. So part of it is personality. But I will say the last 2 years, I've put a lot of intentional work into making sure I'm not in burnout. Because it's very easy for a job like mine to consume your whole life because you're traveling a lot. And I also worked with like all of my best friends. So there was a lot of layers there.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I will tell anybody who's like, oh my gosh, I feel burnout, you got to get hobbies. You have got to get hobbies because most of us, all of our hobbies are now our job. So the hobbies that you had at 15, you now get paid for. You got to go back and think, what are things that are fun for me to do that have nothing to do with what I do for a living? That's good. And for me, I still enjoy filming those things. That's still fun for me.
Sure.
But that is just so huge. You have to have a hobby that gets you out of your house and lets you meet people that are not chronically on the internet. It's so big.
I was right with you until you said get out of the house, and now you lost me.
That's getting out of the house could just be taking a walk. But for me, I'm an introvert who works from home. So if I ever want to have friends that that don't work at the same company as me, I have to leave the house.
Yeah. I was going to say, I don't know if Caleb's touched grass for months. So like, this is a difficult concept for him to grasp.
Every once in a while.
Their own. You got to have hobbies.
Yeah.
Caleb, when she mentioned that, you had a visceral reaction over there. I saw you like
get outside. I was like,
absolutely not.
I have discovered legitimately, this is actually true, that I have a sun allergy. It is a thing. I break out in the sun. So I have an excuse to never go outside again.
That's fine. Your social life is going to look different than everybody else's.
That's fine. But I do think that something like very, very practical, but like having things that you love to do just because you love to do them and prioritizing making time for that, whether that is going outside or doing
Destiny
stuff is playing video games,
read a book, okay?
Read a book, build Legos, whatever you got to do, like having things that you're passionate about. I have absolutely discovered that every single time that I have taken something that was a hobby or just something I did for fun and figuring out, hey, how could I make money with it? The speed at which that just disappears from my life because all of a sudden I just now hate doing it. It's like it's like 100% chance that it happens.
We've been told that everything has to make money, and that is trash. You can just enjoy it, and you don't have to be good at it. That's a whole other thing. We don't have time for that.
This is not the podcast for that. We'll start that another time.
Blackbar podcast 2, the one where they talk about economics.
No, you just have to enjoy it, and that is a part of rest. And God tells you literally to rest, and that doesn't look like just laying down. That can look like doing something that is delightful to you.
Yeah. Right.
So you got to do that. You have to prioritize it. Otherwise, if things aren't going well in work, your whole life is a mess because it's all that your life is.
Yeah.
And especially in church world, it's so easy. to do that.
Yeah, in church
you
world,
gotta set some boundaries.
right?
Yeah,
in church world, you get that extra layer of not only this is my job or whatever, but this is my calling. This
ministry.
is right.
Yeah.
It's
And
the
you should
kingdom.
want to be here.
Right. Yeah,
Whole
but
thing.
also sometimes you don't want to be there. Sometimes I want to go home, right? Yeah,
just part of it.
Absolutely. So much gold, Tessa. Thank you for everything you talked about today. We're going to transition in a second here to Blackout, which is just our Q&A portion where Nick
turn off my light, I guess.
Zach can turn off his light. I don't have the ability to
I'm gonna
turn
stay
off
bright.
but yeah, that's fine. If I could
Caleb
figure
can't
out
turn
how
off
to
the sun. Yeah.
Wait, how about this?
Lord
I'll
knows I
open my
would.
blinds.
No,
Jeez.
that's fine.
It just got very
do
blue.
Right.
That white balance went out.
Oh yeah.
Right. So, Nick, I believe, do you have any questions and stuff that we've gathered from the community for Tessa and some of the topics that we've talked about today?
Yeah, actually, one of the questions we asked to prime our community, we were asking them about specifically, event capture and turning around content quickly. And so something that we asked them was like, how does our audience make sure that they get things done quickly? And they brought up some really good points. And so I'll read these and formulate some questions from them. So one of them mentioned specifically having a clear idea of the final message and story to be mentioned beforehand. I know we kind of touched on that a little bit too. But when it comes to that specifically, Tessa, was there anything more that you wanted to add, or something that we probably may not have hit when it comes to specifically looking at the pre-production, looking at the final product? Is there anything more that we can talk about in regards to making sure that we're having that final message in mind? Now, we talked about goals, so I know we the answer might just be make sure you're hitting your goals, right?
Yeah.
But I figure I ask again.
I think it's make sure that everybody knows that goal, not just you. You got to make sure that the contractor you brought in who doesn't know anything about this client, that they know what the goal is, and kind of just checking in, even if it's at the end of the day of a 3-day event and being like, all right, are we still moving in the right direction? Do we need to lean more into something tomorrow? And just recalibrating as you go and making sure that everybody on the team knows where we're going.
Do you have any like recalibration tips? Like if you're day 2 into a 4-day production coverage and you're like, man, day 1, we just missed it. Like, I don't know. What do you do with that? We missed the goals on day 1 or something.
I'm also curious how you decide if you've missed it. Like, what's the criteria there?
I mean, I think you have to try pretty hard to miss it completely.
Sure, fair enough.
Guys, I know we're supposed to take photos, but we made t-shirts.
Right.
I don't know how that happened.
I just took photos of outside. I didn't even know there was a speaker here today.
Nobody was there. The parking lot was very well captured, though. We've got
so I don't feel like you often have a thing where you're like, guys, we missed this by miles.
Sure.
I think it's more that's like, all right, we hit these ideas. All right, okay, what's something else we need to dial in on? Or like, okay, we hit a lot of speaker stuff. How can we do more stuff out in the room? So it's just looking at it and being like, okay, what do we have? What do we still need? What's missing in our gaps? And just making sure that by recalibration, it's more just making sure you are hitting all the way through and being like, okay, we got that. We don't have to think about that anymore. Next thing.
Yeah. How intense are your shot sheets? Like, do you I feel like shot sheets can vary. Sometimes people full on storyboard, they know exactly what they need. Sometimes you're hitting just like the skeleton of like, here's the big things and we'll fill it in. And sometimes people are just like, here's the 5 subjects. Like, do you guys change up the way you approach it?
It's pretty dependent on the client because a lot of our shot lists come directly from the client. Where they'll be like, hey, these are the important things. And we may come in with some story ideas of like, this is the story we're telling. But shot list most of the time comes from client because they know, that's mostly for us to be like, okay, there are 100 breakouts coming out. What are the 10 that are like, we cannot miss?
Yeah.
And they're going to know that. We're not going to know that. So there are certain things where it's like common sense. A lot of our stuff is like, okay, things happened in the lobby, you should make sure you captured stuff in the lobby.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. But most of the actual list comes from the client, not from us.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then whenever we have video ideas, it'll be like, okay, Max, we need you to go get this. Go. And he'll go take care of it.
Nice. Nice.
Working with some churches and stuff, I'm interested in what you're saying that, because a lot of times I've felt sometimes the burden has very much been shifted to the people taking photos or video. Sometimes the conversation begins and ends with, hey, grab your camera and take some photos, right? And so it can be difficult sometimes interpreting what that win is for them. So something I'm hearing you say is, without necessarily saying, is in that gap possibly going to the client and being like, hey, I can definitely take photos, but let's talk about what things you really need. So that way, before the day of, there are no questions that really need to be answered. Or if there are questions that need to be answered, they're not the big picture questions.
Well, even if you're a volunteer on a Sunday coming in, I volunteer at my church, and my friend Mitchell, he runs all of the creative. And so a lot of times when I'm there, I walk in and I go to Mitchell and I'm like, hey, is there anything outside of the list that you have printed that's always with the camera gear that you want done? And he tells me if there's anything happening. And then my pastor, I usually run by him and I'm like, on a scale of 1 to you're on a bike in the lobby today, how crazy, are you doing anything crazy?
Yeah.
Are you talking about moving around on stage, or just something is doing crazy?
Well, he did have a Sunday where he rode a bike down the aisles, and I was on live cam and had to follow him the whole time. So that's kind of my marker for the most chaotic. And so
Are you talking motorcycle or
no, just a bicycle?
Oh, bicycle. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
And so anytime I ask him, I'm like, a scale of 1 to you're going to be on a bicycle today. Are you doing anything?
That's a pretty good gauge.
Crazy.
Yeah, that's a pretty good gauge.
That's a good.
And so part of it is just okay, I'm a volunteer. I'm not in charge, but I can ask questions. I can come in and be like, hey, is there anything outside of the norm that I need to know about? Or he might be, we don't have any, we need new nursery photos. Can you make sure that you focus on that? Because they got a million things to think about. And while it is their responsibility as a leader to do that, it's very helpful to them if you have a little bit more brain space, to ask and be like, hey, do you need anything from me? And they might not. Yeah. But sometimes they do. And sometimes they're on a bike.
Yep.
I
they don't think about the fact that they need photos of it until you ask them. You're
like, are the lights going to be up? No.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Or they'll be like, hey, you got that one moment, right? And you're like, what do you mean? You're like, oh, that one thing that was really cool.
Bro, you didn't even tell me there was a moment.
Right.
Yeah.
I was editing photos because I thought I had everything.
Right. I really appreciate the emphasis that you put on, in the previous question, how you talked about making sure that not just you and the client know the goal, but everyone else working around you. Because I think that really relates well to something we just touched on too about volunteers, right? Yeah. Is it's very easy for us to forget sometimes when working on a volunteer team in church that sometimes the vision may not necessarily trickle down unless we actually communicate it. And so from what you've been talking about, I really appreciate that we're kind of even giving agency to those volunteers to be like, hey, if you don't know, ask. Now, hopefully the church you're volunteering at is okay with that too. But that might be a different podcast if that's not the case.
Yeah.
No, I think it's so important with volunteers to make sure that you're not taking them for granted and that you're making sure that they are prepared. I think because it is a free service and it is a ministry, it's very easy to be like, well, they should want to be here and they should be excited to be here, and never take time to, 1, make sure they're prepared, and 2, to give them feedback. That's a big thing that at my church we've gone back and forth on to really settle in, and making sure that we're getting feedback, because you shot this Sunday, but are you getting better? And our photographers don't edit, just because of how our system is right now. So they're not actually in their photos making sure that they're like learning what they did well and what they didn't. So I think a big part with volunteers is not only making sure they're prepared, but also making sure that you're giving them feedback so that they can continue to grow and they know that you saw what they did and that you valued what they did. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, I scheduled them, they were here and now they're gone.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially if you got people that's what they do for a living and then they're coming in and doing it free. That's that's like even harder.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I know I've definitely felt that before. We had another question. It's more of a statement that was sent in, but I can turn this to a question for us because we asked them what frustrates you in the pre-production process, and someone mentioned lacking full details, delay in essential questions or response from client or ministry, which is definitely in the vein of what we've just been talking about. So if I can reframe this a little bit. We've talked about the importance of getting all this information and to the point where you're going out and giving people the power to go ask the questions if they don't have to. Let's say, for the sake of argument, you've done all that, but you've got nothing. That it's already the day of. What do you do? How do you handle it when there's just been zero communication?
There's no rules.
This happens all the time. No. I've really hammered on getting those details because you may ask 100 questions and only get 5 answers.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's 5 more answers than you had before. So you really just have to be flexible and be willing to know that you know what you're doing and you are good at what you do. And so you are going to do the best that you can with what you have. And you're going to have to ask questions on the ground. And it's not going to be as efficient, but you'll get those answers because the person is directly in front of you. And if you can't, then you're not going to be able to do that thing. And that's fine. You move on to the next thing. You really have to, once you're on the ground, you have to hold things loosely. If you're like this, oh my gosh, no one ever gave me the information. I don't know how to do things. How am I supposed to do this? Do the best that you can with what you have. Your ability to be flexible and to work with what you have is a superpower that people should value more. And that's just part of it. If you are working in live events, you are not going to have all the answers that you want, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
So the best that you can do, why I am intense about making sure that pre-production is done is because that means that I'm 25% more prepared than I was before, which means I now have 75% of my energy for creative acts instead of 50% or whatnot. Like that's just you lower the amount of stress as much as you can, and then you just roll with it.
I feel like there's some tips, and maybe this is just because I recently transitioned to becoming a project manager, but I feel like there's some PM tips in here of like, are you asking the core questions of your client beforehand? And then if you're available the day of and don't have a direct role, are you able to find out those questions day of to help support your team? Because sometimes your team just doesn't have the capacity to do those things. I like how you've been framing it of like, how much of that extra work are you getting done beforehand that just allows you to be creative day of? And I feel like that's what, churches, I feel like churches very rarely have a project manager available to them in this capacity. But let's call them a producer, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes producers are more able for production teams. So that producer role can be getting those questions or can be problem solving those things live. And I think a lot of that comes down to the trust. Like, does your project manager have that connection with the client that they can start to anticipate their needs? So if you're a project manager or producer, then how can you better set your team up in that regard? I mean, my thought.
Project manager, your job is to get the info, make sure your team is prepared, but also protect your team.
Yeah.
You are the in-between that makes sure that the client success is important and that your team's health is important.
Yeah.
And you got to figure out, there are times when you're going to have to sacrifice for one for the other, and you have to make that call. And that's a hard position to be in. And I'm not in it because I don't project manager, but I have so much respect for the people who do. I'd be a terrible project manager.
It is hard. But whenever you're in between, for sure. It sometimes it feels like there's no win. There's no easy way. There's not an easy answer, and someone's always going to lose out. But Yeah. It's a balancing act for sure. Zach, I'm sure you're having to do a lot more of that these days in your project management role.
No.
Jeez.
So earlier, I know we talked about it briefly, and I asked the question. We moved a different direction, but I'm going to bring it back to that. We had talked about what kind of content does really well.
Yeah.
And what you had mentioned, Tessa, was that kind of like behind the scenes. People want to see how things are happening. So what I wanted to kind of look into is like how, for churches specifically, how can we possibly be creating or even planning content like that where we're showing behind the scenes? Because I know for some churches, they may not want to show too much behind the scenes.
Yeah.
In other areas, there may be just a policy where they don't want to show what's happening behind the curtain, or not to, for theological reasons, create idols perhaps or something like that. But figure I'd pick your brain here and kind of see what kind of ideas you might have for how can someone show behind the scenes at a church service, or even behind the scenes throughout the week at a church.
Well, I think you could do a thing on like, what does it take to do a Sunday morning? What are the elements? Like, okay, we've walked in, like kind of like a day in the life of like, okay, first person, I've arrived, we've turning on the lights, we're turning on this, we're making sure that this is set up, and doing kind of a quick look at like, these are the pieces that have to happen for us to be ready for you to come in to the door today. That kind of stuff. A lot of behind churches are kind of hard because just because the person is on stage doesn't mean they're good on camera or they want to be on camera. And so that's a hard thing, because it's like not everybody is a Mike Todd who's ready to go on camera and hype. Like not everybody is that person, and that's fine. You don't have to be that person. The pastor might not be the person that you use on camera to show stuff. It might be someone in the youth room who just is really enjoys doing it. And so it doesn't, I think that's part of it, is like figuring out who is comfortable and willing to do that and saying, how can we just give, and part of it is like, okay, you're in a ministry, you're serving people. What does it look like to prepare to do that? What does it look like to partner with nonprofits in your area? Highlight your community. Andy Stanley's church did a ton of that with their For campaign of like, okay, who are the people in the community that are doing good work? How can we shine light on the community instead of us?
Right.
Yeah.
Just looking and being like, how can we show people the qualities of Jesus that we are valuing and showing? Is it excellence? How do we show that we pursue excellence in what we do?
Yeah.
Right.
And getting into that,
good.
I could probably come up with a bunch of ideas. I feel like I got very abstract there.
I was going to say, what I heard is if all else fails, grab the street youths and bring them into your videos. So that they
The youths are ready to
It's
go.
always the youth. They're ready to go.
They are ready.
Quick, maybe off the cuff question, like really fast. We don't need like a crazy answer for this, but like, do you avoid trends when it comes to creating event recap content? Like, do you avoid trends? Do you lean into trends? Like, there's so many social media trends nowadays. It's kind of transforming what a trend is, but
I don't think trends make or break you. I think if it makes sense, awesome, run with it. But I don't think, like 2 years ago, everyone was so focused on trending audio, and it's like you needed to have the trending. You just have to be fun and interesting and engaging. And if that coincides with a trend, awesome.
yeah.
Right.
I don't double down on a lot of trends just because a lot of accounts are business ones, and so they can't get the audio, and so you have to rip it, and it's a whole thing.
Sure.
Right.
So I don't typically lean into audio-based trends for a lot of clients.
Yeah.
But it's all a matter of like, will it work for us? Awesome. If not, move on. And like transformation sometimes does a great job of bringing in trends in a really interesting way.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work for every single place.
Right.
And you don't need to be chasing it. It's not, if I don't do this viral dance, I'm not going to succeed. That's another thing you could do.
I personally think that they should bring the Harlem Shake back. I don't know if you guys remember the Harlem Shake trend.
Did you see Gospel Lee's Instagram post about that too, Zach? Is that why you're bringing that up?
I think I might have. Yeah. Shout out to Gospel Lee and his bring in the Harlem Shake back.
Of all the things I expected to be talking about today, the Harlem Shake, that's one of them.
It's like all the youths are redoing the Dougie, and you're like, no, we had a dance.
What is this?
Stop making
Not how
new
it's
ones.
done. Yeah.
They're just
Find
doing
your own
Fortnite
dances.
dances, and it's like, come on, these have already been done.
I'm curious, an inversion of Nick's question, and I want you to be as mean as you want to on this one. We're in blackout, you whatever.
Yeah.
It's
You're
fine.
right. Relax setting.
What's the content that churches are posting all the time that doesn't work and it never works? And if you could just scrub it from the internet, you would.
If all you're doing is giving a list of what's happening this week, and it's all informational, and it's all about you, no one cares. Like, yes, make sure that people know what's happening, but if the only thing you're doing is asking people to come, to show up, no one cares about that. You have to give. Everything shouldn't just be, hey, come on Sunday, hey, come on Sunday.
Yep.
And that's across the board. But churches really fall into that, partially because they don't always have younger generation in it, honestly.
Right.
Sure. That's fair.
Yeah.
But you
It's fair.
see that a lot with churches because that's the easiest thing to do, is to just be like,
Right.
oh, this is what's happening this week. Cool.
Right.
I could have seen that on your website if I really wanted to know.
You have to give. I like that. I like
Yeah,
that.
you have to give. How, like, okay, you have kids ministry. Do you have resources that you can give parents for how they can lead their kid throughout the week? Share those.
Right.
Is there a book that you're like, oh my gosh, our kids have loved this. It's all about this Jesus story. Do a read along. Like, what are things that you can do to put resources and show that you have resources back to the community versus just, you should come on Sunday.
Yeah.
You really should come on Sunday.
Yeah.
They know that.
Those kinds of social media accounts are run by boomers or older people that are treating their social media account like a website or like a TV advertisement.
They're talented, just not at this.
Right. I'm going to steal that. The way that we've worded it in the past is like, it's like having a TV channel and running ads 98% of the time. No one would watch that. You have to actually have interesting content from time to time. Otherwise, no one's going to stick around for every once in a while, maybe you should talk about your service times.
Yeah.
But if that's like 75% of what you're talking about, we know. We just don't care.
It's also really interesting because even if you get into ads and stuff, I can tell them the first word that comes out of someone's mouth when they're selling me something. And so thinking about, okay, does this sound stiff and salesy? How can I loosen this up? And that's something with my own content. Whenever I do like brand stuff, I have to really think about it, because if it sounds salesy, I don't want it. And figuring out even in your tone, how you're talking changes. And it's very interesting to like just watch happen.
Interesting.
Oh yeah. It's when I'm scrolling online, as soon as I recognize, oh, this is a sponsored ad, boom, gone. Swipe away.
Like, I don't want a TikTok shop thing. I'm not buying anything from TikTok. Goodbye.
I did buy one thing. I
will go find the website on my own.
Just out of spite, pure spite to the TikTok ad. You'll find it. I will pay twice the price somewhere else.
100%. I don't want TikTok to get this sale.
No way.
Forget
Now,
you.
I know Caleb didn't quite fully mention it, but I know, knowing Caleb's the bane of his understanding of church social media, and the thing that he knows in his heart will never work, is countdown posts.
Just the ones where it's like a number 3 and then a number 2 and a number 1 to whatever event. Every
5 days
time
out, they post like a 5.
And asked by a client to do that, the number 3 gets like 20 likes, and then number 2 gets like 3, and no one interacts with number 1
except for the CEO.
Yeah,
and their mom.
I'm not gonna lie, I make those all the time, but I don't really. They're just a fun thing. They aren't really a conversion.
Right.
But the only thing that might be a is that someone sees it and goes, crap, I haven't bought tickets yet, because no one ever buys tickets until the day before.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But I mean, fair. But I don't know that I would have a vendetta against countdown posts.
I don't know. It's just my personal experience.
That's your ick.
But I'm glad they work.
Yeah.
They've worked for you for sure.
I don't know if they work. I just make them.
I hope they don't listen to this, so I can still keep saying no to them.
I got paid to make them, so I'll make them.
Hey,
Let's
that's
go.
fair. That works.
Oh man. Okay, well, I know we're landing up today's episode. Tessa, we always like to make time for shameless self-promotion for our guests. Is there anything you'd like to shamelessly promo, whether that's Reverb related personally or otherwise?
Talked about Reverb a lot. If you have events, reverb.com. Come find us. If you
spell that
like
out.
books,
Spell that out.
come
real
find
quick.
me. Reverb, RV as in Victor, RB as in boy. No vowels because we couldn't afford vowels. Just kidding. We couldn't get a URL with vowels.
Yeah.
That's exactly the same thing we did.
Yep. Blackbar, BLKBAR. We only could afford one vowel.
No vowels here.
Yeah. So
But yeah.
reverb.
Yes. If you need stuff there, events, branding videos, design work, come find us because we can help. And then just for me, if you like books, that's all I got. You like books in a silly, goofy time. I'm your girl.
What's a book that everybody needs to read this year?
I have a good one. It's called The Anthropocene Reviewed. It's by John Green. I know it's a weird
John
word.
What is that word? John Green.
Anthropocene Reviewed. It's a book of essays all around. He takes a different topic, whether it's Diet Coke or Monopoly or the Indy 500, and he does like a 4 to 6 page essay on it. He talks about the history of it, his own experiences, and then brings it into like how it relates to humanity as a whole. It's going to be in my top 5 this year, and
Wow.
I already know it. Incredible, easy nonfiction read. Everybody should read it.
All right.
Awesome. Well, we can find you online at your name inserted into Instagram. So if you're watching, just check out the if you need a spelling on that last name, then you can just look at the episode title. That's how you can do it.
We can
Italian.
put the link down in the
There you go.
Voccola.
Be like my friend Will once in a video credited me as Tessa Voccola.
Voccola.
I'm credited in a music video as that. Thank you, Will.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Don't spell it that way. That's not how you spell it.
All right, don't spell it. Don't spell it. All right, Nick, take us home today for this episode.
Absolutely. Tessa, thanks again for joining us on the Blackbar podcast. And thank you guys for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe. And also, if you haven't heard of the Blackbar community already, we are on Discord. We have a whole bunch of people over there who are all like-minded individuals who are Christian creatives. So if talking with Christian creatives is something that you like to do or something you like to do, make sure to find us over on Discord at discord.blk.bar. And also, if you need any help making specific projects, different creative things, Blackbar, pretty much anything that has to do with pixels is something that we can do. So go to blk.bar, you can find us there, and we can start a conversation about how we can help you with whatever your media needs are. Thanks again for watching.
We'll see you in a couple weeks.